Hi everyone, it's Lauren and these are the reviews for all of the books that I read in the month of July. The first two books that I read I actually mentioned in my What I Read in June video because I was currently reading them. The first of these is Agnes Gray by Anne Bronte. This was my first Anne Bronte and I have to say I really liked it. I think as classics go, it was just nice and it was quite enjoyable. It's very, very readable. It's about a young girl called Agnes who it falls on hard times, has to go and become a governess, and it's about her kind of trials and tribulations with nasty children that she's working with, and there's a bit of a love story in there as well. I don't have too much to say about it because I don't think there was too much going on in the novel, but I will say that I think it was a very enjoyable read, and it probably is a very good book for you to read if you are new to classics or you're struggling with classics. I know some of the first classics that I picked up were Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, and on the first read I hated both of them, and I think if I'd started with something a little bit more like this, it might have eased me into the tone and the style of those kind of books. So in that sense, I thought it was a really good read. And then the second book that I finished right at the beginning of the month was The Lesser Bohemians by Amy McBride. Now this is a review copy. This book is out in September, and this is the second book by Amy McBride. She's the writer of A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, which I absolutely loved. It's one of my favourite books of all time, so I was so excited to read this. This is about a young girl from Ireland who moves to London to go to drama school, and she falls in love with a much older man, and it's about their relationship, and it's also about both of them uncovering something that had happened in their childhoods. Amy McBride writes in a really interesting way. It's almost like a stream of consciousness. She doesn't really use grammar, and at the beginning she doesn't give her characters any names. She just refers to them as like she, him, flatmate or something, and you're very much inside our main narrator's head, and it's really interesting. It's almost like she just throws emotions and thoughts and like cultural references down onto a page, and you somehow have to piece a narrative together from that, and I really enjoyed that style of writing. I thought it worked really well in A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing. I'm not convinced it worked as well in this book, but interestingly, either one of two things happened. Either her writing got more coherent and more like a normal style of prose as the book went on, which I think in some ways did happen, or I just got more used to that style of writing and I didn't notice it as much. So it is interesting what she's doing in this novel, I think, which is as the characters are uncovering more about each other and becoming more like real, fully fledged humans to each other, we're sort of getting a little bit more of the narrative, and it's like the prose is following what's happening in the story, and I think that's as an interesting technique. I really like her writing. I do think the actual story in this maybe let it down a little bit because I think the narrative just wrapped up a little bit too neatly for me, and I found everything a little bit too convenient, which is a bit of a shame. But I was really engrossed in it when I was reading it. The next book I read was Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. This is a graphic novel and it is an autobiography of Alison Bechdel's life growing up in a family where she was gay and her father was also gay, although he was completely closeted, I guess, and keeping everything under wraps. And it's very interesting. I'm not sure that I kind of loved Alison Bechdel's art style. I did think her story of her life and how she writes I found very interesting and very beautiful. She is also very self-aware as she's writing about herself, and I think that's a very clever thing to do because she likens her father's journey and her relationship with her father to like Odysseus and Ulysses, the actual book Ulysses, and she kind of makes all of these parallels, but then she's also very aware that she's doing that and she's projecting that onto her father's life. And I think that is really, really interesting. I read this book, I think, in a day because I was just really engrossed in it and I wanted to know what would happen next. I almost feel like I read it too quickly and now I don't really know what I thought about it. The next thing that I read in July was some poetry. I had a very varied reading month this month, and that was 40 Sonnets by Dom Patterson. This is my first book, probably, of just pure poetry that I've read in the last few years, and you may know I've been trying to get myself into poetry, and I've heard a lot of good things about this. I'm not sure that I'm a fan of this collection, and I don't know if that's because of the poetry or me as a reader of poetry, and I'll tell you what I mean, because I feel like a lot of people really loved these sonnets, and there were some in there that I really, really loved, but mostly I wasn't really moved by it as a collection. And I think that could be because Don Patterson has used the structure of a sonnet, which is a very rigid structure, and for me that came across as quite, in some instances, I've got to say pretentious, and in others just a bit rigid and a little bit old-fashioned, but then that's the medium that he's working with, so there's nothing wrong with that. And when you step back and look at what he's doing with like the number of syllables and the rhyming structure, you can see that he's being very, very clever, and I appreciated the cleverness of some of these sonnets, but I didn't care. But there are a couple that I did really love, and I think that's a bit of a shame because I wanted to love this whole collection. It could be that I'm just not used to reading these kinds of poems, and the more that I read of them, perhaps I would learn to appreciate it. It's certainly something that I would look at reading again. I did read some of the poems a couple of times just to kind of get my head around what was going on. So I don't know, this is a bit of a maybe one for me, and I would love to hear from you if you've read these, what you think of it, and whether it's just me not understanding something, or I just don't have a preference for Don Patterson's poetry, like personally to me. I don't know. And the last book that I read in July was Troublesome Love by Elena Ferrante. We're having all of the colours of the rainbow today. Elena Ferrante is an Italian author. I loved her book, The Days of Abandonment. She's also the author of the Neapolitan novels, My Brilliant Friend series, which I've read the first one in, but I've not finished the series. This is the only other book I think that's been translated into English that I hadn't read of hers. And I've got to say, for the first time in my Elena Ferrante experience, I was disappointed in this book. I'm not sure whether it's because this was her first book and perhaps she's just getting into her style, or if the translation was a little bit clunky, if I'm honest, which I find surprising because it's Anne Goldstein who translates all of Elena Ferrante's work, but I just felt like I was missing something. And to me, that's the feeling I get if I think that something's been lost in translation, so I'm not sure. This is about a woman whose mother has just died, and she goes on a kind of strange experience, reliving her mother's final days, her final weeks, trying to piece together what happened and why her mother died, and also linking that back to an event which happened in her childhood. And she's sort of getting, it's like a cathartic experience, I think, getting out her relationship with her mother and kind of hanging everything out to dry. And while I liked that premise, I found some of the metaphors in here a little bit difficult to follow, and I wasn't really sure what she was saying or what she was trying to say. So I don't know. Like I said, it could be that something's lost in the translation, or it could just be that she's trying to be a little bit too clever, which means that her meaning was completely lost. Because a little bit I was like, oh, I know that there's a meaning here, but I don't, you've just been too obscure that I can't get it. I'm sad that I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it at all. This was definitely like a 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I just have my bar set so high for Elena Ferrante that I was disappointed in this specific one. So as always, I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books. I did not do a July wrap-up part 1 and a July wrap-up part 2 this month because I was a bit bad and just read like 1 book in the first 2 weeks and then read loads of quick books in the last 2 weeks, so it would have made for a bit of a strange video, but I think I'll get back into that structure in August because I quite like being able to talk about books in a little bit more detail. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you're new, you can subscribe for more videos by clicking the little red subscribe button just under the left-hand corner of this video, and I will see you next time. Bye! And hearing about people like that, I do find inspiring, and it's such an absolute tragedy that the reason I found out is because she got murdered. Otherwise I probably would never have known what she was doing, which is to do with my ignorance as well. And it's just hearing about things like that, it just makes me want to get politicised, or me anyway. It makes all of this whole situation makes me want to get politicised.